So we'll go back to our project that we've been using as a demo vehicle to see different concepts. We use that New York Times top stories as our review piece for assessment. But now, yesterday, as we did, we refactored our code to use dependency injection and encapsulation on our view controllers. Okay? This was all done programmatically. If we go back to any of our view controllers here, we have fully encapsulated the view controller. What does that mean when we say it's fully encapsulated? No, that's fine. Sorry. All our properties are marked private, and the only way to access or modify those properties are via methods. Okay? Keep in mind that the initializer here is a method. It doesn't say func, right? But that's a method. So here we're using an initializer to inject our data persistence, and in my case here, also a user preference. Okay? That locks down our view controller for public access. Nobody can access our properties. So this was done all programmatically. And as we said yesterday, as of iOS 13, you could do that same sort of encapsulation with a storyboard. Before iOS 13, there was no way to do that, right? You had to mark your properties public in order to instantiate an instance of that view controller from storyboard. But now, as of iOS 13, we could go ahead and do the same thing that we do in code, right? The syntax for setting up the view controller is a bit different, but the object-oriented principles still adheres, right? Cool? Any questions? Okay, what are we gonna do? Basically, this is our app, right? What's our app? This is our app. When I click on an image, I want to present a view controller with just that image, so we could go ahead and zoom that image, okay? So that's the goal for this particular app. So if I run my app here, and again, do we all have the app in that state where we have a detailed view of the image of the story?
Yes, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like when I click on, when I just open up my app, there's a different set of views, and when I click on the picture and come back, it's changed it.
So right now we have New York region, right? I go to the news story. I go back to it, it's still New York region. Make sure your view will appear. You're not calling fetching view will appear.
No, not that. Like when I go to fashion, I go to fashion news, right? And I leave from it and come back. It's the same fashion news, but it's not.
Pull me after lecture so I could take a look at it. Cool? Yes, sir. How you doing? Okay. As we're coming in, please keep the door at a minimum with the noise level there. Okay, so first objective, we need to go create a storyboard. The storyboard will have a view controller scene. The view controller scene will have a scroll view, a content view, and an image, okay? And that's our first objective. So let's go create that. I'll create it in my supporting files. I'll say command new. It's a storyboard file. I'll name it zoom image. The storyboard file is called zoom image. Okay. And let's go create a view controller to manage that scene. Okay, let's create a view controller here. Cocoa Touch class, next. And UI view controller is our subclass, and we'll say zoom image here. Zoom image view controller. Subclass of UI view controller. That particular view controller will manage the scene that we have in storyboard. Next, and create. Great. Okay. let's go ahead and set up our view controller. Our view controller needs a scroll view like we did before. UI scroll view. It needs an image view. We'll have a private image of type UI image. At this point, we have an error. Anybody want to point me as to why we have that error and how can we fix it? Or which ways can we fix it? Yes, Chelsea? As we coming in, let's get that door. The what? Right, so Chelsea says one way we could get rid of this error here, the error says no initializers, right? It doesn't even tell us what property. Ideally, at some point, it would tell us, hey, image is not initialized. But right now, it just says no initializers for this view controller. So Chelsea says for image is the one the compiler is complaining about because image right now does not have a value. Everybody? I've declared some image variable, but I haven't given it a default value. In a class, again, if I'm in a class doesn't have a member-wise initializer, right? So I need to provide either a default value for our image or provide, as Chelsea says, an initializer, okay? If I have an image, yeah, like if I say equal to something here, like UI image, for example, right, I set it to some value, right? My compiler error goes away. That's one way. Anything you do as far as like setting a default value, I won't get that no initializers error, right? Other ways we've done in the past is implicitly unwrapping it. The value is nil. The value is nil. Again, we need unison answers here because this is unit 1, right? Or we could also do optional question mark, okay? But here we'll do what Chelsea says, we'll go create an initializer. In that case, what does our initializer need? What does this view controller need? An image, right? Yesterday we had dependency injections with data persistence, for example, but that particular view controller needs an image. So that's what the initializer needs. So let's go ahead and set that up. It needs an image of type UI image.
You don't need the underscore behind the image.
We're not done here. It also needs a coder of type NSCoder. And this needs to be a failable, sorry. It needs to be a failable initializer. Okay? If it's coming from storyboard here, it needs this coder value. Okay? So again, we're doing dependency injection with storyboard. This is the syntax you need. Regardless of what dependency our view controller needs, it needs to have a coder property. Everybody? Right? Coder, as we said yesterday, a view controller conforms to NSCoding. Right? Coder is that NSCoder is that class that archives our view controller and unarchives our view controller. Okay? Very similar to our init with coder, required init with coder. Yes, sir?
Doesn't the required init already contain the coder property?
In our case, when we're doing our setup or when we try to get that view controller from storyboard, we need to get that coder value itself in that initializer. Because we're coming from storyboard. If we were not coming from storyboard, no coder would be needed. But if we're coming from storyboard, the file itself needs to be coded into XML or whatever is happening in the background. And NSCoder is the class that archives, very similar to our JSON decoder. It archives that file. Cool, very good. All right, what else do we need here? We need to set our image. image is image, and we need to call super. In that case, we're not calling super init with nib like yesterday, but we need to call the super coder on that view controller. Also required. And lastly, we need to implement required init here, as we did yesterday. Okay? So we need to, again, if we're doing storyboard setup, this is the code we need. Regardless of how many parameters we have here, for example, if we have an image, we have some sort of name that we need, we have some sort of is complete Boolean value it also takes, which is of type Boolean. Regardless of how many parameters we have here, we need to have a coder here in order for us to also call our supercoder. Because here we're not calling super init with nib. We're not coming from a nib or code. We're coming from a storyboard initializer. If you're coming from a storyboard initializer, it needs to have a coder value associated with that initializer. Okay, so we don't need a name or is complete here. Great. Okay, so that pretty much is our initializer on an image. So now our error goes away here because this is initialized. Let's keep going on. We have our scroll view, as we did before with this, the subway map. Everybody remembers the subway map? When we had the subway map, we were zooming it, right? We need to set our scroll view delegate to ourselves. What else we need to set on that scroll view? A view we'll do that in the storyboard file. But what else do we need to give the scroll view? What else do we need to set on the scroll view? In order to zoom, what else we need to set? The content view, it's going to know its content once we put that image on there. But in order to zoom, what do we have to set? It's not a gesture. Maximum zoom scale. So here, because the maximum zoom scale is 1 by default, in order to zoom, to make that image bigger, you have to give it some sort of zoom scale value. We'll say 5. Again, think of scale as when we transform something. The identity is what? What's the identity of a scale factor? When I say identity, what is that default value? If I scale up to 3 and I want to go back to normal, what's that value I go back to? 1, right? So 1 is that value. If I say 1 here, which is the default, I won't be able to zoom out.
What would happen if you did like 0.5?
0.5, you could zoom in, I guess, in that point. Like go back, go smaller, but not bigger. It will go back to its normal size, but decrease by half. Yeah. Okay, so right now we have one more thing to take care of here. Since we say scroll view is the delegate, we need to conform to the delegate. So let's go ahead and conform to zoom UI scroll view delegate. What's the one method we implemented here in order to be able to zoom that image view? What's the one protocol method on scroll view?
Did zoom?
Did zoom close?
For zooming?
View for zooming, right? It's very good. So here we say view for zooming. And what are we returning here? Shania? What view are we trying to zoom? Not the scroll view. What's going to be on the scroll view? The image view, right? So here, return image view. So view for zooming, the scroll view is asking what view you want to zoom. What view do you want to zoom here? In our case, we return the image view. The image view is going to have an image, and that view itself, the whole image view, is able to be zoomed at this point. So that's the setup we need, and I think that's it here. Any questions? We've done this one with the subway map, right? The subway map was the same logic. Question? Greg, got a question?
Yeah, saying I can't convert UI image to UI view. Did I miss something?
We have an image here. We have an image view here of type UI image view, right?
Yeah. Oh, no, thank you.
Uh-huh. Yes.
Is there a gesture on the scroll
have?
The gesture has many gestures. Oh, the scroll view has many gestures on it already, right? You just have to ask for what gesture you want, for example, right? Like it's panning. Also, remember it's panning, it's pinching. It has like basically, I would say almost all the gestures there. It has pinch as well. There's nothing else we add in on it. Yes.
What's the difference between on line 18, the coder?
Line 18.
And this coder and the required init coder?
This guy?
Yeah.
So the required init is also required. Since we say we're creating a custom initializer on the view controller, we have to implement the required init because that's part of the NS coding protocol, right? With the minute you say you go ahead and customizing your initializer, NS code is like, hey, wait, you need to implement required init as well.
But isn't that, so,
We're not using required init, but we just need to implement it.
but isn't, because you said the coder and this coder, we need that because we're on the view controller,
Yeah, storyboard.
storyboard?
Yes.
And so, doesn't it register the coder and this coder as it being on the storyboard as well? The
Doesn't
required init
it?
coder?
This part is from storyboard, right? The coder itself.
So
The
the
coder.
required init coder is not from storyboard, that's just the.
This one just has to be, if you, the minute, like yesterday we also did it, anytime you say I'm a view controller and I'm creating a custom initializer, it's required to implement.
So they're two different coders, basically.
In our case, we are not using this at all in anywhere in our code. When we call in it, we're not using this required in it. But since we're inheriting, that's part of inheritance, which is bad. Anything you inherit and it says it's required, regardless of if you're using it or not, you have to implement it. That's part of like the, some people do not like object-oriented programming because of that inheritance problem there. It's like your mother has diabetes, regardless of what you do, you'll inherit it. But here it's telling us if we customizing that initializer, we have to implement that required in it. Okay? Because it's part of the NS coding protocol. Cool? It's like one of the things, like it would be great to just remove this from the whole setting up of an initializer, but it's there. It's like boilerplate from the parent and the protocol as well. Cool? Very good. But the one we'll be using in our tab controller, no, not our tab controller. The one we'll be using in the detail view is this initializer we created. But this one here is required the minute you say init some custom object. Yeah.
Is it required because it's there to protect us against our customer initializer not having a coder?
No, it's there solely because it conforms to NS coding.
But what was the Apple, I guess, agreement to have us do it required?
Because it's inheritance, and anything the parent says you need to implement it here.
No, I'm saying, well, why did they want us to implement it? Even though, like, I want to know the reason why it's required. Why did they add it to the protocol?
Why did they add it to the protocol? Because the object itself needs to be archived and unarchived. If you don't implement a custom initializer, it handles that for you in the background automatically, right? But here, the minute you say you're implementing it yourself, it needs to know which code am I using. In our case, we're using the coder on line 18. Cool? There's no instance we'll be using the coder on line 23. Cool? Okay. But from storyboard, if you're not doing any custom initializer, the coder logic happens automatically for us behind the scenes.
Can you scroll down to the delegate?
The delegate, we only return in this one? Line 29?
Yeah.
You good, Chelsea?
Yeah.
Okay. Let's just make sure. Okay, at this point, let's set up our two outlets. That's about what we're missing here. So go to our assistant editor. Assistant editor. We do not have a view controller scene yet, so let's add one. So go to our object library and search for view controller. I'm setting up a scroll view. What's the first thing I'm doing? The what? We don't have a scroll view yet, right? So we need to get a scroll view first. Right? So let's get a scroll view. And we want the image to be the entire device. So we'll make our scroll view the entire device. We'll set the constraints here, Chelsea, at this point, to 0 all around. We created a storyboard, Luba. It was called Zoom Image. Okay, so I set up my scroll view. What's the next thing am I doing? What am I adding to that scroll view? What's the next? I'm gonna add a view, right? That view, I'll call it content view, very good. So I will go search for UI view here, which is faster. And I drag a view over to my scroll view. And at this point, I'll use my, well, first of all, let us rename view here to content view. I'll control drag from the content view to the scroll view. Thank you. Control drag from content view to scroll view, and I will set my constraints: leading, top, trailing, bottom, equal width, equal heights. So what do we have so far? We have a view, which came with our view controller. A view controller has a view property. We added a scroll view to our scene. We set up the constraints 0 all around. Then we added a view, a UI view, to our scroll view. We renamed it content view. It's gonna hold the content. And the one piece of content we'll have on that content view is a image view. So let's get to an image view here. And the image view I'll constrain to the content view. So I'll control drag from the image view. I'll control drag from the image view over to my content view. And I'll say leading, top, trailing, ooh, beach ball. So I have 4 constraints here. Great. So our UI elements are pretty much set up. We have one warning here. What's the warning? View controller is unreachable. What does that mean when we see that? We don't have an ID yet for that view controller. So right now, Xcode says there's no way to reach that view controller. Give us an ID.
Storyboard isn't like when we give it like the.
Storyboard ID. We'll give it a class name, but it needs more importantly a storyboard ID. Kelby?
What are the constraints for the image view?
The image view is constrained to the content view. The content view's top, bottom, leading, and trailing. Yeah, cool?
I was looking at the image because it doesn't click on it. I can't click on it right away.
Got it.
What was before that? Before the image view?
Before the image view, it was a UI view. And the UI view was constrained to the scroll view, top, leading, bottom, trailing. Yes, sir.
The scroll view was constrained 0 all around?
Yes. When you first constrain the scroll view 0 all around, you'll get constraint errors because it doesn't know its content, right? The minute it gets some content, it's like, yes, I know how I'm gonna behave. Cool? Very good. Okay, so let us set up or connect our outlets. So first, we'll connect our scroll view in our view controller to our scroll view in our document. Do I have to close Xcode? Is it? No. Oh, I have to change the class.
Yeah.
We're still in a generic view controller here, so I can connect. Like if you have issues here at this point, right, it's not a panic mode. It's like, hey, I haven't set the class yet. Everybody? So let us go set the class. So I click on my view controller, I go to the identity inspector, and here I have a generic UI view controller, so it doesn't know about Zoom image, right? Because remember, that's still the parent class there. So I click on my class, and I type in Zoom image. I press enter. I copy Zoom image as the class name, and I paste it into my storyboard ID. I've seen some folks doing different IDs to the class name. That just leads to bugs, right? So just keep the names the same. Same class name, same storyboard ID. So at any point in your code, you know they're the same. So the class type or the class name is the same as the storyboard ID. And we made sure to press enter here.
The whole thing?
And at this point, we need to connect our scroll view now. So scroll view gets added to scroll view in my document outline. And my image view gets connected to my image view in my document outline. The what? The scroll view was top, bottom, leading, trailing of the, yeah. It's gonna be red when you first do it. And then when you do the UI view, right? You constrain the UI view to the scroll view, all around, plus equal width and equal heights. Then you'll be good. Okay, cool. So we've set up our Zoom image view controller. Let's go use it. Where we're gonna use it is, or where we need an instance of it is in our detail view controller, right? So we'll navigate back to our detail view controller and we will get an instance of our Zoom image view controller. Right now, again, to overview, our image is private. The only way we set up our view controller is with this initializer here that we created, okay? Let's navigate now to our article detail controller. Article detail view controller here. Close this. We need to tap on the image and present modally our Zoom image controller. Anybody want to walk me through what we should do here? So I want to tap on the image. I want to go in here, tap on the image, right? Tap on the image and then present modally our Zoom image controller. So in the detail controller, what's the steps I should probably do? Or how should we go ahead to tackle that problem? Right, so Amini says add a tap gesture to the image, right? That sounds right. So we'll go ahead and create a tap gesture here.
Oh, you're doing that on the controller as opposed to doing it.
So here we have private lazy var tap gesture of UI tap gesture recognizer. We have a gesture of type UI tap gesture recognizer return gesture. We need a function for our gesture.
I have a question. With this, if we created this top gesture within the view, that's what I was about to
You would have to create some sort of delegate. We're not doing a custom delegation talk, right? But know that you would be able to do it that way, okay? If I go in the view, I have to create a delegate or something to go back to the view controller.
Would that be the right way to do this? Like,
That's less code in your view controller.
huh?
Less code in your view controller is always better.
Okay.
But for purposes of, we don't want to lecture whole morning. This is good. Okay, so let's create a function here. Let's create it right here. It's an @Objective-C function. We'll call it didTap. It's a gesture of type UI tap gesture recognizer. For now, again, we'll just have a print statement here. Image was tapped. Yes, you could do it in your article detail view, set that up there, and then use a delegate to communicate back to the controller, right? But that's an hour worth of lecture there. But our objective is just to do dependency injection with storyboards. So did tap, image was tapped, very, very good. We've written our function. Now we could go back to our property initializer where we have the tap gesture and set the target for the gesture. So here, we'll say gesture.add target. Target is self. Action is selector, did tap.
Now we put that on the image, right?
Yeah, and now we need to set up our image. Set up the gesture. We have our image view. We get it from the article. Not article, what is it called? Detail view. Detail view dot image view, news view dot is user interaction enabled, set to true, because it's an image, right? Yes?
Yeah.
And then we'll say detail view dot use image view dot add gesture, tap gesture. Feel free to refactor it after the fact and then put it in the view, a mini, right? After the fact there. Because yes, the less code you have in the view controller, the better.
I know you told us this, but I forgot. What is the reason we use is user interaction enabled? Is it-
By default, what's the image view's interaction and ability?
Well, I know it's false now.
It's false. So if it's false, it cannot receive gestures.
Well, are there any data types that are not like
UI label
labeled?
and image view. Yeah. Very good. Always ask. So setup tap gesture. So image view by default, it's false, so it won't receive our gestures. If you set up some gesture and you're like, oh my God, it's not working, double check that whatever you're setting that gesture on is interaction enabled is true. Everybody? Cool? Okay, so let's run the app and see if we have our print statement happening. That's a good place to test that.
Wait, what we?
Am I online? Ooh.
Did we push over to?
I'm sorry? Okay.
Yes.
Give me a second here.